So last time we ended by making the electromagnet that will be the part of the speaker. This time we're going to be building the case and putting the fixed magnet into the other straw. So to build the case, we're going to use a solo cup, and we're going to have to cut it off to the right height. And what exactly that right height is isn't super significant, but what matters is that we get it consistent all the way across. Because the solo cup is at an angle, has an angled side, it's hard to just cut it flat. So it's very important that we actually use a Sharpie to draw the line that we want to cut. And to make this go easier, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a second solo cup to help me draw the line. So I'm going to cut down in a V shape in the second solo cup. And get something that looks kind of like this. I think I'm actually going to go just a little bit further down so that my cup height is going to be at about that level right there. And then it's just a matter of cutting that out. Which these scissors are not the best, so the end of them isn't cutting real well, but now we have a guide that we can put our Sharpie into. The solo cup that we're going to be using, I'm going to just set inside and then take the Sharpie, hold it on the edge of the guide, and then just turn the solo cup on the inside. And what that does for me is that gives me a solo cup with a nice even line at exactly the same height all the way around it. We're going to cut out to that line. Now, if I were to cut straight down, I would probably cut too far and it would break through and go past the line. So instead, I'm going to cut into it and then spiral my way down with the cutting around by cutting around the glass multiple times. So to do that, we get started by cutting through the lip. That's the hard part. And then we turn and we get to where we're spiraling way before we get all the way down. And I actually should go the other direction because I'm finding that direction it's hard to control the cut. So if I spiral it this direction instead, I can get to where I'm lined up exactly on that line and just stay on the line. And once I've done that, I now have a nice evenly cut off solo cup. So this solo cup is the same height everywhere around it, and that's going to be our speaker. So now that we have the solo cup the same height everywhere around it, it's time to turn our attention to the fixed magnet and the smaller straw. So to get these magnets to go inside, it's just they're just a little bit too big to fit. And so you can't just push them in, because if you just push them in, well, they just don't quite fit. I'm going to use the end of the Sharpie, to go ahead and stretch it out a little bit more. And now it flares out just a little tiny bit. Once you've got it to where it flares out just a little bit, you can go ahead and just press it over in this case, 3 magnets. So about 6 millimeters of magnet going into the straw. Once I've done that, I'll have a straw that has 3 fixed magnets in the end, just like this. And they're lined up right at the end. So now, what we'll be doing is we'll be putting this fixed magnet in the middle of here so that it holds right in the middle. And once we've got it sitting in the middle, then the electromagnet will be able to move back and forth on it. So, for that, we want to cut the straw off a little bit longer than you expect, but I want it to be sitting just a little bit under the top when it's flat, but I'm going to have to flare out the bottom. So to get this cut properly, what I'm going to actually be doing is cutting it to almost the exact same height as the speaker case. So I'll just put it into the bottom and using my Sharpie, just mark that height. Now I have the straw with that height marked, so I just cut it off flat. It's always better to go too long than too short because you can always cut more off, but it's hard to put more back on. Now I have a short straw with the magnets in the top of it. And if we look at where it sits in the speaker case, it will look something like this, but we're going to have to flare out the bottom so that it will sit more perfectly. So to do that, we're going to take our scissors and just snip little cuts out of the bottom of it. So we just snip down and go all the way around, going to the same height. If you want to, you can use the Sharpie to put a line how deep you're cutting it to, but you just need to be consistent all the way around. And once you've done that, you can flare those bottom pieces out, just like this, so that you get a flare out at the bottom. That can then be put into the middle, into the bottom of the middle, and it looks to me like I'm actually going just a little bit too tall still, so I'm going to cut a little bit more off of this. So I'm just going to cut off the current flare and re-flare it. So now if I look at where it is before I flare it up, it's at almost exactly the right height, almost exactly even with the top. So I'm going to be cutting a flare out of the bottom. Just like I did before. This time I think I am going to go ahead and mark the end so I know how deep I'm flaring it to. So for that, I'm just going to go ahead and just roll the straw with the Sharpie touching it. And now I have a mark to know how deep to go. And we just go ahead and flare it out. And just like before, I'm going to fold them outward so that I now have a flared out end to the straw. If I set that in, I see that it's going to put me just maybe 1/2 centimeter below the surface, below the top of the case. So we'll just glue that into the middle. You want to be as close to the exact middle as you can. For me, if you look at the bottom, it says TP16D. It looks to me like the 1 is almost exactly in the middle, so I'm going to use that as my guide for the middle of the cut. Now, we're going to use hot melt glue to fix that into the bottom. So for that, I'm going to start out by just putting a little circle of hot melt glue across the bottom. And this is a place where you can use as much hot melt glue as you want. It will not hurt to use extra. And because it won't hurt to use extra, once I've got it in the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and try to level things out as much as I can and just add more hot melt glue to get it as strong as I can get it. And now what we have is the case with the fixed magnet attached to the middle of it. The electromagnet will go over the top of that and be able to move up and down. And once it does that, it will move a diaphragm up and down to move the air and make the sound.